into rolling out.
What is going on, everybody? My name is Malik Brown, here for Rolling Out. Meet the author, and I am here speaking with Frederick Joseph today, the author of Patriarchy Blues, Reflections on Manhood, and New York Times bestselling author of The Black Friend. Mr. Frederick, how are you doing today?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here.
Definitely. Always a pleasure to speak with somebody like you, man. So, I really want to get into this book, Patriarchy Blues, because it's something that, I haven't read the book, but I've seen a couple of snippets of just explaining of what it is, and it's amazing because as Black men, I feel like this is something that we all need to know and hear about. So for you, I just want to know what inspires you to write this book.
Yeah, the book was inspired by a conversation, actually. I was talking to some of my boys at the gym one day, and we're just kind of talking about like how long it took us to come to terms with certain things in our own misogyny and our own problematic behaviors. And I was like, I don't think that I had the resources to necessarily do that coming up, right? There wasn't a book that I could necessarily think to that was like immediately available, so on and so forth, especially by another man. Right? Someone who like is actually trying to get it right. Like, hey, talking about homophobia, talking about misogyny, talking about transphobia, so whenever I see a gap in society, I'm just like, well, why not fill it? So I spent about 4 years doing research for this book and reading, some of the great womanist thinkers, intersectional feminist thinkers, so on and so forth, trying to get to this point.
And for you, of course, personal experiences, like did personal experiences in your past, in your childhood, kind of help you mold this book into what it was? And did you have any, talking to your friends, of course, I'm sure you got some things from them, but like, what kind of helped you just all mend this together and to create this powerful book?
Yeah, well, I think when I took a look at what conversations weren't being had, I actually realized it wasn't just about men, right? It was about everybody existing in a heteronormative world. You're talking about the issues, like I said, of transphobia, homophobia, but then also, looking really like intentionally at how white feminism shows up in the world, right? Like the dangers of, what happens when, a white woman sheds her tears, in support of white supremacy, but stands behind the shield of womanhood, for example, right? That's how we get situations such as Emmett Till and moments in time like that. So I really wanted to cover a large swath of topics as best as I could, and what I did to do that really was go into my own life, right, and like take a look at what I had dealt with as a young Black man, what I deal with every day as a Black man, and what I see happening all around me.
Why do you feel like the time was now to do something like this? Of course, the past few years, of course, we've dealt with a lot of things, but why do you think the time was now, and why should we be having this conversation now about these certain topics?
Well, I think that the past few years has shown us that in spite of a global pandemic, in spite of all the things happening in the political sphere, people are still being deeply problematic, deeply misogynist, so on and so forth, right? So I think the conversations are long overdue. And for me personally, I'm someone who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in my mid-20s. So what I've tried to do since then is like every single thing possible, because I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like for me, right? I don't know if I'm going to be able to have the conversation at 45, 55, 65 years old, because those days aren't guaranteed. So I'm trying to have the conversation as soon as possible, as often as possible, because, we're kind of behind the eight ball in reality on having these conversations as a society, honestly.
Why do you think it's important for not just, someone like you, but more people like us, more people that look like me and you, to have these conversations together as a group? I know you say you talk to your friends about this, like why? And personally, I feel like, just looking around, we don't have that many conversations with our close ones, with our brothers like that. Why do you think it's important for us to come together and have these type of conversations, and how it can just open up a whole nother stratosphere for greatness in our lives?
Yeah, I think because the power and the privilege lies with us to make the change. So we have to be having conversations no different than, as Black men, we want white people to be having conversations about, the power that they have within white supremacist constructs and things of that nature. But, the reality is that we have privilege and power as well within heteronormative dynamics, within patriarchal structures. And so we can't necessarily point the fingers at other groups without doing the internal work ourselves, right? I say in this book, and I say often, if you can change the world for the most marginalized groups in our society, then you inherently change the world for everybody, right? It's the tide rises, in my opinion, with the Black trans woman, right? The most oppressed group in this country and in this world, right? So if you can make the world better for a Black trans woman, if you can make the world better for a cis Black woman, the world will be inherently better for a Black man, right? You can't have a society in which the most oppressed is no longer as oppressed, and then other oppressed groups aren't also doing better. So, actually doing that work benefits us as individuals and as a collective.
Definitely, for sure. And it's crazy because while I was reading just the little script of what this book is about, it kind of, and last year, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the guy named Jason Wilson, but he has a book called Battle Cry. He's basically talking about, how men, these stigmas that we live upon, like, we always have to be this, we always have to be tough, don't show your emotions, all this other stuff. Like, why do you think it's important for us to get rid of that stigma, and why is it important for us to just continue to just know that we're, at the end of the day, we all humans. So go with that.
Yeah, I mean, those stigmas dehumanize us, right? And that's something that I talk about in the book pretty overtly. Like, one of the essays that I have is on violence, and how, in my life, I've had almost 100 fights in my life, maybe more at this point. And each one of them, I cried after every one of those fights. And I couldn't understand why until I started unpacking it. It's because I felt like my only answer for things was being violent, because if the only language that you've been taught as a man is violence, then you don't have any language to actually have the conversations, to actually unpack the emotional things. So, it's those stigmas that not only dehumanize us, but ultimately stop us from becoming whatever we ultimately can be, right? So I do think that as we start unpacking the stigmas and leaning into other aspects of ourselves, right? The aspects of ourselves that, once again, don't have to be violent, don't have to be rageful, don't have to be hateful, don't have to be angry, right? Then we start becoming whatever is deeper inside of us, like whatever's hiding in there, because that's our true selves.
And for you, just writing this book, did it kind of feel like a self-help book? Did it kind of feel like a biography? Like, did it help as you were writing it? Were you kind of like unpacking a lot of stuff that you didn't know about yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a mixture of a lot of different things, right? There's, it's both. It's a self-help. It's a memoir. It's a book of poetry. It really is this personal journal almost, right? Like, in it, there was one day I was just kind of watching the conversation about Dave Chappelle and transphobia. So I was like, oh, I just got to add this into the book, right? So in that, it's just me as a Black man who's trying to be better and consider certain things, talking about it, right? Because I think that there's so much chatter about that topic as an example, but who was actually sitting down and considering what it meant to be a trans person, right? How that was impacting and harming trans communities. And there's a lot of things like that throughout the book, right? Where again, it's a mixture of mediums, if you would. Hopefully by the end of the book, people are willing to not just consider, but it's almost a stepping stone into other books, right? That people will go and read the Angela Davises and the Mickey Kendalls and Bell Hooks. So.
And you named those amazing names. Were those kind of your inspirations when writing these books? Like, who was your kind of like type of sources that you were going out just getting inspiration, motivation from writing this type of book?
Yeah, for me, I wanted to lean into the depths of womanism, right? I wanted to lean into the depths of intersectional feminism as well. So I just did that, right? I told you I spent years just kind of like internalizing the work of bell hooks, internalizing the work of radical Black women thinkers, right? Internalizing the work of queer thinkers, internalizing the work of trans thinkers, of people's trans experience, sex workers, right? Like, you know, I talk about sex work in the book as well, and just like how patriarchy is at the center of why people are trying to criminalize sex work, for example. So all of this, because I didn't, you know, I hate when people kind of put out into the world without first taking in. I wanted to listen before I could speak. So I spent more time listening, I think, than even writing the book itself.
And you talk a lot about, you know, just these women, just powering the movement and everything for you, and just let the people know, like, how important is it for us to protect and listen to Black women and women of color?
I mean, I think that there's nothing more important, quite frankly, right? You know, Black women specifically have been the backbone of our liberation movements in this country and globally. And that's not hyperbole, that's fact, right? You look at women's suffrage, you look at the 2020 election, you look at the 2008 election, you look at the movements of change, civil rights, so on and so forth. Black women have not just been at the epicenter, they have literally been the backbone and moved these movements forward, right? To protect Black women is to protect Indigenous women, is to protect Black men, is to protect Latinx people. To protect Black women is to protect every single person that is marginalized or oppressed in this nation and abroad.
So going to the title, Patriarchy Blues, like, just what was your story behind just that title, the name? Like, where did you get that from?
Yeah, the name Patriarchy Blues actually was, we were playing with a bunch of different names at the time, and I was listening to some Charles Mingus. I'm a big jazz head, and I was listening to some Mingus, and I was listening to some Monk and some Coltrane, and I was like, man, this book feels like the blues. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, like, got my baby down there. You know, like, I was like, this book feels like the blues, and I was like, this is the Patriarchy Blues, and I was like, oh yeah, that's it right there. Oh man.
But that's amazing. I think that's a really cool way to think of a title for sure. You know, while writing this book, of course, you know, you talked about, you know, how it could be a self-help book, biography for you, but what were kind of like the hardest part? Were there any hard parts about writing this book before I say it? Like, what were some of the hard things about writing this book?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is being vulnerable. In this book, you know, I talk about some really serious topics. It's a very serious book, but you know, there's aspects of it that for me were cathartic, but I had to go somewhere deep. Like, one example is I talk about, you know, the issue of young Black men being molested and raped, and to do that, I had to talk about my own past, right, and my own history of being molested and raped by my babysitter, how her actions affected me for the rest of my life, right? You know, I say in the book that I spent years of my life trying to fill a hole of something that she stole from me with, you know, the pain of other women, you know what I mean? And, you know, so there's depths that I go to in this book that I think hurt, but they also healed me.
And when talking about things like that, just, you know, you can have a reader, and, you know, they may be going through the same thing, but they don't know how to express that. They don't know if they should say anything. Just thinking about just how special this book is could open up minds and people, like, how important is that to you?
Yeah, I think that the book is dual-fold in terms of what I want. I wanted to open up minds and be the beginning of a journey for a lot of people. And I also wanted to help people feel seen, right? I want people to feel heard, seen. I want people to know that they're loved, and, you know, things of that nature.
What kind of inspires you to write? Because I mean, I know you don't just have this book. I mean, you have two more books as well, right? So just what kind of inspires you to write? What, like, did it start at a young age? Like, where did it kind of all start for you?
You know, I've always been a storyteller. You know, my grandmother was a writer, and she, you know, as a Black woman coming up in the the turn of the century and things like that. She never got a chance to be published or anything of that nature. So I always loved writing because it felt like an extension of her, right? It felt like something I had that I shared with her. And, my first career, actually, I got my MBA in marketing. I never expected to be able to go into, creative writing ever in my life. But eventually I did. I got the opportunity through writing articles and things like that. And that turned into this moment. So it's really just paying homage to my grandmother, honestly.
And it just how important is it for us just as Black writers, as Black listeners, readers, to just know that it's okay to come out and be able to express your emotion, be able to, because I'm pretty sure a lot of us feel like we have to hold a lot of stuff in. We can't say much, but how important is it for us to just be able to be open and just transparent and be able to just open up our minds?
I think that the best we can do in art, the best we can do in business, the best we can do as parents, lovers, friends, children, is being our most vulnerable selves, right? That vulnerability and that honesty will seep into every single thing that we do. And there's probably nothing more important, right? Like, especially in these times that we're in with the world and the shape that it's in, there's never been, I think, maybe a more important time, especially with the global communication that we have, right? Just be yourself. Like, because if you're not yourself, nobody else is going to be you, right? Like, so I think that, I stress to everybody, especially Black men, right? Because, there's so much rooted in white supremacy as to how we have to be hard, how we have to be this, how we have to be that, but no one's going to ever be you, brother. You get to be you, and you only get one life to do it. So if you're not you in this life, you're never going to get another chance.
And what are some tips that you think that you would give a Black man, a young Black man that is struggling to, come out and say how they feel or be able to express their emotions? Because so we have ways, therapy and family and everything, but like what are some ways that you think that we could be better, have better ways to express ourselves when we're struggling with certain things?
I would say start out with personal reflection, right? Like, one of the ways that I got to this point where I was comfortable being open to public people, like, the public in terms of my story and the things I've been through, is by first being comfortable with myself, right? I had to start literally looking in the mirror and saying, this is what happened to you. This is what you've been through. This is what you're dealing with. And then I started writing it to myself, right? Putting down in a journal, putting down notes on sticky things, this and that and the third, right? So, that's the first step, in my opinion, is being comfortable with yourself, being comfortable with your trauma, right? Like, being open and honest about needing to heal from said trauma. And then when you do that work and you get comfortable in your skin, then you can be comfortable with other people seeing said skin. You know what I mean?
Definitely, for sure. Definitely think that that's big for sure. Just when writing this book, what were kind of your favorite things about writing this book? Like you say, it opens up a lot, but what were some of the things that you liked about it?
Yeah, I think that in a world where people typically digest things on social media captions and Twitter and things of that nature, when you get to sit down and write and fully unpack moments, it's so beautiful, right? Because it's something that you don't have to write with people commenting under and things like that. That's one of the things I love about writing books, is that, like, I can write something and you can criticize it as much as you want to, but I own that space. That's my space. That's my story. And I think specifically with this book, I'm able to give the world the love and the passion that I have for these topics without people having to, or people getting the chance rather in real time, to try to contradict, right? To read this book forces you to consider before you talk, right? When you sit with my words, before you say anything, you have to think about what I've said. And I think that a lot of people, too many people, don't do that enough in society anymore. So that was my favorite part about writing this, is because some of these topics I've talked about, on my social media platforms, and you're like, well, I think this, well, I think that. You're not listening, right? Sit down and listen, think.
And why do you think it's just so important for that? Just, we sit back because, we like to talk, but like you said, listening is really important, and just dissecting things and really learning about why. So why is it so important to just sit back and just listen and just take in everything that you're getting.
Because you can't lead any conversations if you've never followed anybody before. You know what I mean? How are you going to do that, right? Like I said, and I'm very open about this, and I sit in the back of my book, I give acknowledgments to almost every single person that I learned from throughout the book. You know, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and Angela Davis and all these different brilliant minds. I owe this book to them, quite frankly, right? It's my perspective and my remix to certain things, but I owe this book to them. And if not doing years and years of work, if not standing on the shoulders of the greats who came before me, I can't lead any conversations, right? And they stood on shoulders as well. And I think too many people right now in our society want to talk, right? They want to say something. They want to be relevant, right? They want to be an expert on something. But you've never researched, you've never studied, you've never sat with it, you've never internalized, you've never reflected, and you've never stood quiet for a second. That's how you really lead. Leading sometimes is all about being quiet.
And you talk about research. For you, just writing this book, you know, how much research did it go into writing this book? I mean, of course, I know it's about, you know, some of your life experience and whatnot, but how much research did you have to go in, you know, into writing this book?
Well, you know, I tell people all the time that I'm an intersectional feminist in process, right? Like, I think that my process is far beyond a lot of people, but being in process makes me want to continue researching, want to make me continue to learn. And so before I could even be in process, I'll be honest with people, like I say in this book, I grew up deeply misogynist because I was in a deeply misogynist society. I grew up in a homophobic society, in a transphobic society, so on and so forth. And while I might not have been overtly displaying those things, they were internalized because that's what I came up within, right? So I had to do not just research, but unlearning and unpacking of the things that I thought about this world around me, right? So I spent 4 years doing like strict research for the book, but I really spent about 15 years just unpacking all these things, you know? And I think, you know, to be honest with you, I probably read about 25, 30 different books before even starting it.
Do you remember the day where you were like, you know, I'm gonna write this book?
Yeah, it's funny because I was on the subway coming home, and this was before, you know, the pandemic and so on and so forth. And I was like, you know what? One of my friends, when we were talking about misogyny, he said something. I was like, bro, that's not it. You know, and I was like telling him like, this is not it. And one of my friends agreed, yeah, that's not it. And he was like, oh, well, I never knew that. And I was on my way home. I'm like, you know what? He's right. Because if you haven't read certain people, how would you know that? And especially, I think a lot of times the messenger is important, right? So like a lot of men, to be quite frank, in a heteronormative society are more inclined to listen to another man than they are to a woman, right? So what happens if you say, okay, great, so I will give you a messenger that will lead you to the promised land of the things that these women are saying?
And for you, how important is it for you? I mean, because it seems like you're the person that's leading everybody to certain people. So how big is that for you, just to know that you're inspiring and you're changing the world?
I mean, you know, my grandmother would always say, if you have the hands to do good work, make sure you put them to good work, right? So, you know, that's what I'm here for. You know, I grew up in a household with, you know, people who came out the South. You know, we descend from enslaved people, and you know, all we know is, you know, you put your best foot forward and you get to work, right? And that work, along the way, you try to liberate yourself, and so I do that, right? Like, and I'm happy that others are doing that as well, right? I'm working to liberate myself at all times. I'm not liberated yet. You're not liberated yet. None of us are, but we're on our way. And as long as I can help, you know, make that happen, that means the world to me.
Definitely love that. Love that. For you, what do you think it would take for us to be an ally? What do we have to do to become allies when we're talking about, you know, being allies to maybe trans or like anybody? Just how do you think we could become an ally in this world?
I think you got to reduce your harm, right? I think it's the same thing I tell white people about racism. You got to reduce your harm, and you got to take inventory of your privilege. You know, you got to look around and say, how can I be better for this group of people, right? Because all of us have privileges, all of us have access and resources that could help us help them, right? If you know that you have a friend who's being transphobic, don't just sit there and let that happen, right? Say something, speak up. If you know, like, hey, you know what? I have an opportunity that I can provide to a young person. Great. So maybe you want to provide it to the young trans women or the young Black women or so on and so forth, because you already know, if you've done your research and you're paying attention, that opportunities don't come this group's way necessarily, right? So that's the type of work that I want from people, right? The work of not just saying, because I think that there's one group of people who are like, I want the world to be better, right? Then there's other people who are like, I'm gonna make the world better. I'm gonna get in the trenches. So I want people to get in the trenches and actually put in the work.
And how do you think we get to that point to where it's like everybody's trying to put the work in instead of just them just waking up and just hoping that it changes but on its own?
I mean, you got to make a decision every morning when you wake up to keep doing the work, right? And I think, again, it's no different than people who are wealthy trying to help the working class and the poverty class. It's no different than white people who are trying to be better about white supremacy and white privilege. This is no different, right? Every single day, people who are cisgender, people who are heterosexual, people who are men, so on and so forth, have to wake up every day and say, you know what, I'm gonna tear down these patriarchal structures, I'm gonna tear down these heteronormative structures, and I'm choosing to do that today. So you're not gonna be perfect every day, but if you choose to do it every day, you'll do something that day that makes a change. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I didn't change the world this morning, but it could be the little things that add up. And I think that that's what people need to understand. It's little this, little that, here and there, every single day, making that choice.
For you, Frederick, what do you want readers, your audience, to take away from this book after they're done reading it?
I want them to honestly see the harm that the patriarchy causes, right? The nuanced, systemic, personal harm that patriarchy causes, and how that harm is not just against some of the most blatantly oppressed communities in patriarchy, but all of us, right? Like every single one of us, to the point of even like we said earlier, Black men not being able to have the humanity of a range of emotions, right? That is a patriarchal construct. It is a white supremacist patriarchal construct. You talk about the violence that's bestowed upon men as this rite of passage, right? Like, that is a part of patriarchal constructs. You're talking about not being able to enjoy certain things. I had friends who like, oh yeah, I'm not going to eat an ice pop in a certain way. Like, what are we talking about, right? Like, what are we actually talking about, right? That's how nuanced and foolish it is. You can't even enjoy icicles or ice pops or whatever, popsicles, So I want people to walk away from this book and say, you know what? I'm hearing him. I feel moved. And then for the people who kind of already knew some of these things, I want them to feel seen, like you're not alone, right? Like it's not going to just be like, oh, I'm trans and I can only rely on other trans people. I'm a woman, I can only rely on other women. I want people to know that there are people out here who are trying to be, locking arms with you, in this fight.
For sure. Thank you for this, Frederick. Before you go, I want to say thank you again for just dissecting this book, letting us know everything that's going on. Let the people know where they can find you, where they can find the book as well, definitely, so they can pick it up and just, this is your time to shine.
Yeah, everybody can find me at Fred T. Joseph on Twitter and Instagram. And the book is available everywhere. So anywhere you want the book, it's available. Amazon, bookshop. I suggest that people go to indie Black booksellers if they can find an indie shop that's Black owned. Harriet's Bookshop in Philadelphia is a great example. Mahogany Bookstore in DC. Uncle Bobby's in Philadelphia. There's a lot of great bookshops that you all can purchase the book from. So
definitely make sure you guys pick that book up. Frederick, I want to thank you again for coming on and speaking with us, man. I definitely want to pick this book up for sure. So I'll definitely be looking out for it. And thank you again. Thank you for your time.
Deeply appreciated. Thank you for having me.